will win the legal challenge. So, like Elizabeth Warren, who thinks that the right answer is to break up the companies, if she gets elected president, then I would bet that we will have a legal challenge, and I would bet that we will win the legal challenge. So I mean, I don't have to, have a major lawsuit against our own government. I mean, that's not like the position that you want to be in when you're. I mean, it's like we care about our country and like want to work with our government to do great things. And but look, at the end of the day, if someone's going to try to threaten something that existential, you go to the mat and you fight.
Well, my friends, it's a late night, but a viewer sent me this story. I was checking my email, and well, I'm here up at night, late at night, recording this story. All hands on deck, and 2 hours of leaked audio. Mark Zuckerberg, the lizard man in human skin, rallies Facebook employees against critics, competitors, and the U.S. government. So this is an article of conservative people online. In fact, on Facebook, you will be banned for wrongthink. A lot of conservatives have been banned. A lot of people who disagree with leftism have been banned. And many people know Mark Zuckerberg is he's on the spectrum. He has the tism, and he's kind of unsettling. There's a running meme going around that Mark Zuckerberg is actually an alien or a lizard man in human skin. So here it says, July should have been a relief for Facebook. The company accepted a $5 billion fine from the Federal Trade Commission over privacy issues. Oh yes, they've also violated privacy. In fact, if you're on Facebook, get off Facebook. Trust me, they're taking your private data. They're scanning your photos. Trust me. After having essentially set the terms of the agreement itself, it settled a case with the Securities and Exchange Commission, which alleged that it had misled investors about the risks of user data being mishandled for a relatively paltry $100 million. And Facebook reported stellar quarterly earnings on July 24th, beating investor expectations and sending its stock price up. Now, I don't know if you've seen the movie about Facebook, but in the movie, he's portrayed as an absolute douchebag who steals the idea of Facebook from two men. He absolutely steals the idea. He creates Facebook, it becomes a big success, and he becomes rich. That's who the lizard man is. He's a liar. He's pro-censorship. He doesn't believe in free speech. But inside the company, the mood remained anxious. Several 2020 presidential candidates, led by Senator Elizabeth Warren, had called for Facebook to be broken up. Libra, a Facebook-created cryptocurrency, had run into strong resistance from regulators around the world who worried that it could destabilize the global financial system. Yeah, I would never use or invest in Facebook money. Hell, I would dump my savings in Bitcoin before I put a single dollar in Facebook Libra or Libra or whatever they're calling it. By the way, I do not recommend that you do that. Bitcoin is highly volatile. Do not put any more in there than you're willing to lose. Employees had questions about Zuckerberg himself. Why had the CEO declined multiple requests to appear at government hearings in Europe, and worried about Facebook's increasingly dim reputation among their peers? These questions were raised at two open meetings with employees in July. The Verge obtained 2 hours of audio from the meetings, which include extended question and answer sessions between Zuckerberg and his employees, in language that is often more candid than he typically uses in his public comments. Zuckerberg seeks to rally the company against Facebook's competitors, critics, and the U.S. government. That sounds like treason to me. On how big tech can solve the issues.
It's just that breaking up these companies, whether it's Facebook or Google or Amazon, is not actually going to solve the issues. And, it doesn't make election interference less likely, it makes it more likely, because now the companies can't coordinate and work together.
Now I want you to look at this comment and kind of think about the double think there. Regulation is not good. We could not decide what the truth is. What he's really saying is that censorship will be harder with regulation and with companies being broken up. So what he's telling me is that the best thing we should do is break up big tech. And I agree, break them up. These people are too powerful and they're too evil. Amazon hasn't done anything wrong yet, but I'm looking at them and I see an early Google. My prediction is they will become evil as well. There's really no choice. Even I dream of having my own company someday, and I wouldn't want it to be broken up, but places like Google and Facebook have become far too powerful. And they've abused that power time and time again.
That's why Twitter can't do as good of a job as we can. I mean, they face qualitatively the same types of issues, but they're, they can't put in the investment. Our investment on safety.
Wow. So is this what it's like to be an elite? To be so far above everybody that you can laugh at Twitter profits because your company is so massive. Our investment on safety is bigger than the whole revenue of their company. Your investment on censorship, you mean? Look, I've put out multiple stories about Facebook, the secret lives of Facebook moderators, the stuff they have to go through, the mental problems these people have, the emotional problems these people have, because of the type of content they're forced to police. It's not an easy job. And they're abusing people. Facebook moderators are treated like trash. I mean, it's horrible. Those videos are on my channel if you want to see them. Zuckerberg sounds earnest and genial throughout the Q&A sessions. He jokes repeatedly about how he would have been fired several times over the years if he had not negotiated for total control over the company, drawing laughter from his employees. He also explains why he has repeatedly refused to testify in front of governments around the world, and he talks about the awkward rollout of Libra, the Facebook-developed cryptocurrency. Like I said, that is the last... Okay, look, if you want to invest in Libra, you can. Invest in it, wait for it to grow, and then cash out. Do not hold Libra. I have more faith in Bitcoin than anything Facebook has made. I don't care how big they become. Screw Facebook on refusing to testify before other governments.
I'm not going to go to every single hearing around the world. A lot of different people want to do that. And when the issues came up last year on Cambridge Analytica, I did hearings in the US, I did hearings in the EU. It just doesn't really make sense for me to go to hearings in every single country that wants to have me show up. And
fair enough. I sure as hell wouldn't go to the EU because I don't give a damn. On Libra's rocky rollout.
The public things, I think, tend to be a little more dramatic, but a bigger part of it is private engagement with regulators around the world, and those, I think, often are more substantive and less dramatic, and those meetings aren't being played for the camera, but that's where a lot of the discussions and details get hashed out on things.
The CEO also speaks earnestly about challenges the company faces, whether it's about Facebook's unusually large amount of downtime this year, or what obligations the company has for its 30,000 contracted content moderators. As I brought up, asked about the Verge's stories this year on content moderation, Zuckerberg dismisses them as a little overdramatic. Wow. So the lizard man could care less about these peasants. Work your bone, peasants. No bathroom breaks. You are to continue to look at gore and animal suffering until you can no longer stand being alive. Do it, slaves. Whip, whip. With a population of 30,000 people, there's going to be a distribution of experiences that people have, Zuckerberg says. What an absolute sociopath. His companies running the content moderation are terrible. Watch my videos. I go through the entire stories. I put a lot of effort into reading it. It's called Pepe Memes Are Red Pilling Facebook Moderators. It's on my channel. There's also a follow-up called Facebook Moderators Are Being Blackmailed, or something like that. Okay. On protecting contract content moderators.
What's going on. It's not that most people are just kind of looking at just terrible things all day long, but there are really bad things that people have to deal with. And making sure that people get the right counseling and space and ability to take breaks and get the mental health support that they need is a really important thing.
So this is bullshit. I cover that in the story. By mental health support, they'll give them like a 10-minute break in an empty room. And by counseling, yeah, it's not going to exist. These people don't have health insurance. Elsewhere in the conversation, Zuckerberg presents a plan for halting the global advance of its latest competitor, ByteDance's video app TikTok. The company introduced a clone named Lasso and released it in Mexico, where TikTok has yet to make inroads in an attempt to perfect the product before rolling it out elsewhere. Yeah, screw you, Facebook. The last thing we need is you spreading your cancer to more places.
We have a product called Lasso that's a standalone app that we're working on trying to get product market fit in countries like Mexico is I think one of the first initial ones. So we're trying to first see if we can get it to work in countries where TikTok is not already big, or we go and compete with TikTok in countries where they are big.
While many of the issues discussed during the meetings are serious, Zuckerberg also tries to lighten the mood. When one person asks whether Facebook would ever use its brain-computer interface technology for ad targeting purposes, Zuckerberg muses about the challenges of building a brain-computer interface using invasive surgery techniques. "You think LIBOR is hard to launch," Zuckerberg quips. He imagines what the headlines would say. "Facebook wants to perform brain surgery." "I don't want to see the congressional hearings on that one," he said. As the room breaks into laughter. "Ha ha ha ha! The lizard man is laughing." Imagine if we used our brain technology interfacing for brain surgery, people implanted in people's brains. We could even do mind control. Little puppets here in my lizard room. I'm pulling the strings. Man, I creep myself out just saying that. Elsewhere in the transcripts, Zuckerberg discusses TikTok's biggest challenge, why he wants to maintain total control over the company, and what Facebook employees should tell their friends who think badly of the company. Oh yeah, of course. Facebook good, freedom bad, etc., etc. And then it links to a full list of the Q&A session. Well, this was certainly interesting. You guys, I'll leave a link in the description if you want to read the full Q&A. I think it's quite clear. Mark Zuckerberg is a bad person. He doesn't care about censorship. He doesn't care about the people, and he doesn't understand humans. But that's merely the obvious. Well, that's all for now, folks. What do you think about Facebook? What do you think about this leaked audio? What do you think about what was revealed? Be sure to let me know. Now, as always, this channel is completely unmonetized. That means I have no ads. I receive no ad revenue. YouTube took them away from me. They completely stripped my ability to make a living on YouTube. It sucks. It's terrible. That is why I am 100% viewer supported. If you want to join me, you can do so. Links are in the description. I have a link to Patreon. I have a link to Subscribestar. I have a PayPal link, and I have a cryptocurrency address if you want to donate Bitcoin. You can join Subscribestar and Patreon for as low as $1. Doing so will get you access to Fight Club, a private Discord server. A special thank you to people who...
But she's not proud of Germany. She doesn't like it. She's embarrassed to hold its flag at a German rally. You just need German psychology. Well, let me prove it to you on video. Look at Merkel when she was handed a German flag at a rally. Check it out. Did you see that? She's the Chancellor of Germany, but she's not proud of Germany. She doesn't like it. She's embarrassed to hold its flag at a German rally. You just watch that again. How can that be? It's not the Nazi flag. I would get it if she hated that and threw it down, but that's the new German flag. What's going on with the German flag? Germany today is a liberal and progressive and democratic country. It's actually a pretty great country by all measures. Well, she hates it. I know that sounds nuts, but she says so in as many words. Check out my video here proving it using some startling comments she made. Just click here. In a nutshell, she thinks Germany has no moral authority today because of its history 80 years ago. So Germany today has no right to keep its German identity, no right to keep out countless Muslim migrants, and it even has no right to denounce terrorist groups like the Islamic State because Germany's moral authority is so low. If you doubt me, click here for the proof. I did a whole video on it. Anyways, Angela Merkel has a deep psychological issue with Germany. That's fine. I get it. But she is using her whole country as a psychological punching bag, as some sort of voodoo dolls to stick pins into, to exercise her own demons. That's why she's letting in millions of unscreened Muslim migrant men. She wouldn't let them in if they were white or if they were Christian. She would not let them in even if they were Chinese. She is specifically letting in millions of Muslim men for father moved their family from West Germany to communist East Germany. The antidote to German Nazism was via communism. Now the opposite force to Germany is Muslim extremism, whatever it takes. Her whole life, she's had a death wish for her country. How odd and how sad that she now has the power to make it come true. For the Rebel.media, I'm Ezra Levant.
Greta, I saw your presentation at COP24, and it was compelling, but I respectfully dispute your statements. A child is a miracle, Greta. A child should be able to live in joy, entranced by the wonder of the world, not in fear of the future or hatred of their elders. Big climate is a $1.5 trillion global industry. Greta, it's all built on a faulty premise that carbon dioxide is like a control knob on climate. But science has shown that that is not true. Your ancestor, Svante Arrhenius, not only developed the hothouse theory of catastrophic global warming, he also amended his catastrophic view. In 1906, in this paper, he wrote in German, he decided that warming would be perhaps around 1.5 degrees Celsius and beneficial. So when people tell you that the world only has 12 years left, they're telling you science fiction, not science fact. Those scary predictions come from computer simulations that are based on a worst-case scenario that is so far removed from reality, many scientists are angry that people are being scared and fooled in this way. But climate has become a big green business. That's who's greedy and uncaring. Big Green doesn't mind if poor people become poorer from heat or eat poverty. They just want the subsidies and the carbon credits. Let them eat carbon. You might have had to marry at age 15 because people were only expected to live until they were about 35. You say that we're stealing our children's hand plow with a yoke around his neck. She lived through the Great Depression when many people lived on the verge of starvation. She and her brothers fought in World War II, and she lived to see humans. What incredible things humans have accomplished. What a fabulous future you have. And almost all of the accomplishments were only possible thanks to the power of coal, natural changes in climate, which, if you study history, you will know that there are many. Get off the strike line and go to school. Learn to think for yourself. Be curious so you can't be fooled. And help. We live in a world of wonder where science is about inquiry, not compliance. For the Science Society, I'm Michelle Sterling.
The New York Times produced this article only a few days ago. How to develop an appetite for insects. Scientists who study bugs are thinking harder about how to turn them into good food. Some time ago, CNN also covered this topic. To feed the world, why not eat bugs? Many insects are nutritious and packed with protein. They could help feed the world and reduce the effects of food production on climate change. The Guardian has also produced articles about this. And this idea is all in the name of environmentalism and fighting climate change. I've also previously discussed the Swedish behavioral scientist who recently suggested the rather radical notion that we could consider eating dead human bodies as a way of saving the climate. It's almost as if the public is slowly being primed to the idea that they should expect significant food shortages in the future. One might conclude that given how economically burdensome the climate change agenda is on countries, taxing people with, green energy and carbon taxes on top of all the extortionate taxes they already pay, that standards of living could seriously be about to drop in the Western world to levels that are similar to those found in developing countries where they eat insects. Now, keep in mind something that was said by one of the young students at the UN climate event recently.
It doesn't matter how much we're taxed if we don't have an earth to live on.
It doesn't matter how much we're taxed if we don't have an earth to live on. And so the people will be sold the lie that man-made climate change is an existential threat to the human race and that the solution is unending taxation, apparently. In my opinion, the populace is slowly being primed to expect a future of massive austerity and jaw-dropping poverty in the Western world. Anyway, we've got lots to talk about in this video, and it's all coming up right after this. First, a big shout out goes to our sponsor for this video, Vikings War of Clans. The development team asked me to give this game a shot, and I quickly fell in love with this immersive free-to-play MMO strategy game. Vikings was inspired by the classic strategy games of the 90s like Civilization or Command & Conquer, so it really takes me back to my gaming roots. You play as Jarl, you're the leader of your own kingdom, and you start your journey by building your town, scouring for resources, and building your own army. This game requires careful thinking and strategy and resource management as you engage the enemy in massive battles that will hone your tactical skills. The engrossing gameplay is supported by rich 3D graphics, beautifully rendered locations depicting ancient kingdoms, and a storyline that's brought to life by wonderful voice acting and colorful characters. I personally love how the developers brought the universe of Vikings to life, with an immersive narrative and a well-written story. You'll build your city, expand your empire, and plan your conquests in an historically 1 million players who've downloaded Vikings. Help support my channel by downloading Vikings for free only by using my links in the description box below and get the special bonus of 200 gold coins and a protective shield. See you on the battlefield. So welcome back. Now, on the subject of this growing narrative about how we're all going to be eating insects in the future, here's another article I found about this from Forbes. These 3D printed toys teach children to eat insects and food waste. To help kids familiarize with the idea of eating sustainable meals such as insects and food waste, Swedish ad agency Forsman and Bodenfors have devised an innovative 3D printing play food set which includes futuristic dainties the likes of the Bug Mac, an eco-friendly insect burger, and Tasty Waste, a serving that looks like a conceptual sculpture made of a pine tree and a pink donut, but actually represents a dish made of recycled food waste. As reported by Adweek, the aim of this toy line, called Play Food from the Future, is to raise awareness about the fact that over the next decades, we'll have to teach our kids the importance of eating in a more sustainable way and reducing food waste. One way of curbing the environmental impact of the meat industry is to diversify protein sources for human consumption. For example, farming insects has the potential of being more environmentally sustainable than farming land animals. That's the reason we find an insect burger as a futuristic play food item. Sorry, but human beings evolved to eat animal protein, period. And more to the point, there's no country in the world where insects are a part of a staple diet. They're at best considered a delicacy in the developing nations where they're eaten. The human race is going to be in big trouble if we have to rely on insects and plants to survive. Anyway, moving on to other social problems. My own city of Dublin is now like any other major cosmopolitan multicultural city in any Western nation. It now feels like a cold place, having lost its character and sense of identity. Many of the housing developments that have been built over the past few years are kind of cheap quality builds, but insanely overpriced. But not everybody is lucky enough to be able to afford a house. People are often squashed together in unsightly box-like apartments, and there's no sense of community or connection with neighbors anymore. More and more people are living in isolation from each other, atomized and alone. And the village or town square in many of these housing developments is nothing but a shopping centre where it was once the parish, the church, or the town hall. So endless consumerism and materialism is now the replacement for a real sense of community cohesion. The cost of living is through the roof. Average rental prices in Dublin have now reached an all-time high of €1,366 per month. That's about $1,500. The current millennial generation are finding it difficult to attain the kind of lifestyle and economic freedom that their parents and grandparents had by comparison. Home ownership is a very difficult thing to achieve on a single salary, and if a couple living together both have to go out and work in order to cover the mortgage and the bills, it kind of doesn't leave much time for raising a family. Though I'm sure the prospect of raising children in this increasingly dystopian world is possibly less appealing to many young adults, especially given the Marxist crap being taught in the school system. In short, people are struggling to get by. If you're not on a really good salary, Dublin is an expensive place. Salaries aren't great, and it's easy to feel like a bit of a wage slave. Also now in Ireland, we have record levels of homelessness. It's now reached over 10,000 people across the country. We have a housing crisis which is driving property prices to obscene levels. And this article is on the Irish Times that discusses a recent minor drop in house prices across the country. This is the first decline we've had in over 7 years, but let's not get carried away. It's only an average decline of 0.2% in the year to July. The article also points out that the latest figures show the typical cost or median price of a home nationally was €255,000 and €366,000 in Dublin. Within the Dublin region, Dunleary Rathdown had the highest median price, €530,000, while Fingal had the lowest, €337,000. These prices are just astronomical. There's an article on fora.ie from 2018 that discusses a report by The Economist. It says, it's now more expensive to live in Dublin than London. The Economist's cost of living index ranked Ireland's capital 19th out of 133 cities. I look at Ireland, especially Dublin, as being like a mini California, filled with big multinational corporations and Silicon Valley tech giants attracted to our low corporation tax. I look at a place like San Francisco as potentially being our future. A super liberal place, housing bubble, high cost of living, a lot of social problems, but at the same time, there's big money there. And we're seeing the emergence of this growing inequality between the haves and have-nots. A new kind of aristocracy is forming. The massive and hugely powerful billion-dollar tech giants and the supreme wealthy living in their own little bubbles. And then there's everybody else in the surrounding areas struggling to make ends meet by comparison. Also, in the US, a kind of servant class is emerging. This article is from Breitbart. Servant class that serves the rich among fastest growing US workforces. A servant class that serves the needs of the country's top 1% is among one of the fastest growing job markets in the United States, economic analysis finds. As about 1.2 million mostly low-skilled legal immigrants are admitted to the US every year to take primarily low-wage jobs, an underclass of servants for the wealthy has boomed over the last decade compared with overall job growth. Research by MIT's David Autor reveals that servant-class jobs like manicurists and pedicurists have grown 114% between 2008 and 2018. Meanwhile, all US jobs have grown just 7% in the same time period. Likewise, massage therapist jobs have grown 105% over the last decade. Family therapist jobs have grown 98%. Skincare specialist jobs have grown 93%, and animal caretaker jobs have grown nearly 60%. This is what people refer to as the gig economy. It's not stable work, it doesn't pay well, and people have to be self-employed. Economists admit that these servant-class jobs are oftentimes self-employed and therefore leave workers without benefits like health insurance and offer low wages. A piece published by The Atlantic notes that although foreign-born workers across the US represent about 10% of the overall workforce, foreign workers represent 20% of all workers in the servant class, indicating that foreign-born workers are twice as likely to work servant-class jobs. Data published exclusively by the Associated Press shows that in 2017, there were about 3.2 million servant-class workers in the US, an increase of about 2.8 million since 2010. As you might imagine, this kind of work pays quite a bit less than the US average income. These servant-class workers, according to the data, earn an average of about $36,000 a year. Compare this to the average pay of all occupations in the country, which stands at about $51,000. This indicates that servant-class workers are earning, on average, $15,000 less than the typical American worker. The article concludes with, similarly, the country's top 0.01%, the millionaire and billionaire class, has enjoyed more than 15 times the wage growth since 1979, more than 343% compared to the bottom 90% of Americans who have seen a growth of 22.2% in wages. So anyway, let's move on now and talk about a recent report by CNN on pod sharing, a proposed solution to the incredibly expensive living standards and rental prices in San Francisco.
Podshare is affordable shared housing that we build across Los Angeles, and here in San Francisco is our first site. The idea, it's membership-based housing, so if you book a pod, you can stay across the whole network of locations.
A pod, eh? I can't wait to live as a pod person. Wait, In San Francisco, a pod costs $1,200 per month for what is basically a bunk, and you have no privacy? You're literally bunking with strangers. $1,200 a month for this. Are you kidding me?
I was born in the USSR in 1985. My whole concept was like the idea of the government giving you everything in a communist state.
The government gives you everything in a communist state? Actually, I'm fairly certain it takes everything away in a communist state, including the means of production and your property rights.
What if you could subscribe to a housing membership and have all your needs met? In the fridge, there should just be like cereal, ramen, collegiate foods, and there should always be toothpaste and toilet paper and just these basic things that you just need to live. Like,
wow. Look at this place. This is communal living, folks, which is to say you don't have a home of your own. Precisely what I'd expect in a communist state. Someone compared pod sharing with this photo on the left to Auschwitz, pictured on the right. It's a fairly alarming similarity.
They should just be handled for you. And that's kind of the concept of pod share. You just share pods across a network with people that become your friends.
Maybe they become your friends, but you have no choice but to interact with strangers as you have no privacy. But there's absolutely no way you're going to be friendly with every person across the PodShare network. And that's the problem. You can't really get away from other people that you're staying with. Imagine if someone snores or has some bad habits that drive you nuts. You're stuck with them.
This location has 2 bathrooms. And this one's currently being used. In each pod, you can see here, there's obviously a mattress, pillows, linens, your essentials. This is my pod right here.
Just think, San Francisco, a major city of the United States, is so expensive that people would actually consider this kind of lifestyle. As Paul Joseph Watson pointed out in his video about this, house prices have been artificially inflated because of a wealthy Silicon Valley elite, onerous building regulations, and mass immigration.
I earn about $3,000 per month. I tried living in San Francisco on that budget. I was able to do it, but it was really, really hard.
It's just tragic, really. $3,000 a month should be sufficient to live quite comfortably, but it isn't anymore. I feel sorry for this chap, but he should consider living elsewhere. San Francisco is just stupidly expensive. It's also a city that's got a lot of problems, including a huge amount of homelessness, high crime rates, and apparently there's needles and human feces on the streets in large amounts. Here's a clip from an NBC report.
There's more feces on the sidewalks than I've ever seen, growing up here. That was something that wasn't the norm.
Than you've ever seen.
Than I've ever seen, for sure.
We surveyed 153 blocks of downtown San Francisco. We spent 3 days walking up and down every street, inspecting more than 20 miles of the city. We found trash on every block, 303 piles of feces, and 100 needles.
I don't know why anyone would want to live there. Anyway, back to the CNN report on PodShare.
PodShare model is really for myself, which is solo, single, no children, no pets. I'm really just building something I want to live in.
And in my opinion, this is the problem, because this kind of life isn't conducive to relationships and family. It would be quite difficult to maintain a romantic relationship with someone while living in this kind of environment. It's kind of hard to have your girlfriend or boyfriend over for the night. You know what I mean? It's not like you can entertain friends and family in your PodShare. You don't own anything. You're spending a fortune every month, $1,200, and it's going to rent a pod? You may as well be living in a box. And that's the problem. It's getting more and more difficult for young adults to become homeowners. My concern is that this kind of model will get proposed to young people in the future when massive austerity spreads to other places.
So the hardest thing about living in a place like this is that you give up your privacy. That's something that you do have to get used to.
In space, no one can hear you scream. And in a PodShare, everyone can hear you shit.
There's certain things you have to give up when you want to live in the center and pay no security deposit, and that's privacy here.
It's bad enough that we have no privacy in the online world at this point, but in this scenario, you'd have no privacy in the real world also. No thanks. This is not a home for someone. This is a very expensive hostel.
I've actually had people mock me for this type of living arrangement. I think many people might think that is it dystopian to group a bunch of people into one living space?
Yes, it is. It is absolutely dystopian.
but I think it's one of those don't knock it till you try it type of things.
No, thank you, never. Anyway, I'll conclude by saying, let's just hope that the worst austerity can be avoided in the future, but all I'm doing in this video is connecting some dots. We're being told by various media outlets that we could be eating bugs in the future because of climate change. And at the same time, our cities are getting out of control expensive. And now we have this idea of pod sharing. Are these things potentially in our future? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this video, please subscribe for more, and you can follow me over on gabandminds.com. You can support my work for as little as $1 per month over on subscribestar.com or my website, computingforever.com/donate. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.
Play together. I have a plan. 東北大学加齢医学研究所川島隆太教授監修、脳を鍛える大人の任天堂スイッチトレーニング。
You gotta have real. Portanto, enquanto nós não votarmos, nós não contamos aqui. Então, vamos participar. Vamos participar. E eu, no momento em que eu sentir medo da polícia, eu estou a sentir medo do Estado. No momento em que eu sentir medo de entrar na segurança social, muito ansiosa, porque serei provavelmente humilhada, eu estou a sentir medo de ser humilhada pelo Estado. Nós estamos a falar do Estado sempre, a cada hora. Europe, it's not white. Europe, it's not a white man also. And also, it's important, and I'm a stutter. There, it's very important to understand that equality, it's not enough. We need social justice in Europe. Thank you. O que nós também defendemos a sério maneira é o direito à nacionalidade a quem nasce em Portugal. É um direito humano alguém ser reconhecido no país onde ele nasceu. É inaceitável que haja milhares de pessoas nascidas em Portugal que na hora de renovar a sua documentação oficial lhes seja exigido registro criminal do país de origem. Se este é o seu país de origem, e se às vezes nunca estiveram mais nenhum outro. Mas são oficialmente de origem niente, cabo-verdiana, angolana, moçambicana, etc. Muito bem. Joacina Catar Moreira, do Livre, também a mesma pergunta. Eu iria já iniciar por publicitar a RTP. Muito obrigado. E, did you get that box? Yeah.
Well, here we go. Another day, another fake hate crime hoax. Take a look at this. We're over at thepluralist.com. Black student who said white classmates cut her dreadlocks off admits she made up the entire story. Absolutely fascinating. Hey, lefties out there, I thought that white supremacy was the biggest domestic threat to this country and the world and the solar system while we're at it. Those white people are all over the place. Just beating up black people, cutting black people's hairs off, ripping off people's hijabs. Oh, wait, hold on. You just got to wait 24 hours? And every single time these things turn out to be fake, you got to go to the 5th page. You got to scroll down for an hour to find the retraction. Meanwhile, they blast the original story over and over and over again on the front page. Big, gigantic hate bait. In fact, take a look at this. People over on Reddit, they've got the New York Times post for this story back on September 27th. It goes a little bit like this. Black Virginia girl says white classmates cut her dreadlocks on the playground. The police said they were investigating a report by 12-year-old Amari Allen that 3 white students forcibly cut portions of her hair at their Christian school. Oh no, boys, the story. It's got all of the SJW elements in it. It's got white boys. They're attacking a POC, and not just any POC, a whamming POC. They would have hit the bingo slot if this kid was Muslim. And then on top of all of it, Christian school. It's a Christian school too. Oh man, they were running this all over the place. And now that it's fake, take a look at how they've restructured the incitement headline, if you will. September 30th, same garbage website, New York Times. Virginia girl recants story of boys cutting off her dreadlocks. The 12-year-old girl's story drew national headlines and a police investigation last week. Her family has apologized. Oh, I guess it's okay then. I guess we're all good. I guess we're totally fine. The fact that you took 3 innocent young boys and then just laid a fake hate crime on them, as long as you apologize, that's totally fine. We're all good. Everything's set square. Fuck no. Tired of all of these apologies. I don't know what the police can do to a 12-year-old girl. If you filed a false crime investigation, police report, if you will, my brain's broken, but it's been a long day. There needs to be some sort of repercussions for that. You can't just let people file fake criminal complaints. Jussie Smollett, looking at you. Maybe you can find the family. Not quite sure. But something has to happen to this kid. Is she at least kicked out of the school? She clearly can't be in the school. But then look at what the school's going to be like. Well, we can't kick her out. She's black. What's the school going to do? Yeah, she falsely accused these 3 other students, or the families are paying something like $11,000, $12,000 a year to be in this school. Yeah, she only tried to ruin their lives. But if we kick her out, all of these blue checkmark assholes on Twitter are going to call us racist. And so they'll probably acquiesce and let the kid stay there. She's a victim of trauma. It wasn't her fault that she ginned up a race crime. Let's take a look at what happened over here. We're over at thepluralist.com again. A 6th grade student who last week accused 3 classmates of forcibly cutting her dreadlocks has admitted she made up the allegations, according to her family and school principal. Amari Allen, a 12-year-old African-American girl, had accused 3 white boys in her grade at Emmanuel Christian School in Springfield, Virginia. She said they held her down on a playground during recess, covered her mouth, called her insulting names, and used scissors to cut her hair. Fairfax police launched an investigation into the incident last week after they were contacted by the girl's family. Meanwhile, social media erupted in outrage. Commentators made much of the fact that Vice President Pence's wife, Karen Pence, teaches art part-time at the private school. And here's an example of these lefty assholes. Blue check marks, so you know you should be listening to Kevin Barron over here on Twitter. At the school where Karen Pence teaches, the one that bans the LGBTQ peoples, this happened. White supremacist boys pinned down black classmate, cut her dreadlocks off at Virginia's school, and then bathed in her blood. I added that last part, but you know that's what they're thinking, right? I mean, why in the hell would you involve Mike Pence's wife in this, other than to try and tie in the fact that this is Trump's fault? Look at this. His vice president's wife is working at this school where these white boys are just randomly attacking black chicks. Bullshit. When are any of you lefties going to realize that every single time one of these national headlines of a hate crime attack always turns out to be fake? All right? If the world is dripping in white supremacy, you wouldn't need so many of these fake instances. This is bullshit. Notice how these all turn out to be fake and the media runs with these, but the media never wants to run about the grandma in Canada who's being yelled at, she's being screamed in her face, being called a Nazi by Antifa. They always want to skip over the fact that Antifa's beating the shit out of gay dudes. They always want to skip out shit where we have the receipts and we have the video. They never shout about those. They never plaster those. They never try to hate bait with those instances. But these fake ones, they always seem to broadcast. They always want to signal boost these fake ones here. It's almost like they're trying to push this false narrative on the world that white people are beating everybody up because we're white supremacists. Interesting how that works. All right, guys, thanks so much for watching the video and supporting the channel. If you're interested in more content covering these fake hate crime hoaxes, make sure you stay tuned. All right, guys, take care. Bye.
Ja, det var min kompis som sa att jag skulle springa med.
Hur gör du för?
Varför ljuger du?
Passa! Har du slutat? Hassan! Vad är det med grabbar här?
Var är dina grabbar?
Var är dina grabbar?
Var är dina grabbar? Var är dina grabbar?
Vad gör du? Sluta! Hassan! Akta!
Var är dina grabbar som ska knulla mig?
Nej.
Var är dina tabbar?
Var är dina tabbar?
Var är dina tabbar? Var är dina tabbar? Var är dina tabbar? Akta,
Sluta!
Vem skulle slå i dig? Vem skulle slå i dig? Vem skulle slå i dig? Du förstår mig också, eller? Var är dina grabbar? Mina grabbar?
Ja!
Du vill slå Hassan och mig och du vill slå mig.
you people? Okay, shut that thing off and grab some seat.
I know you don't trust me. But we have a common enemy and a common cause. He's searching for something. Something very precious to the Empire. We're done hiding, Cal. Are you with us?
We're in.
All right, where we going next?
We're going to save them. No! Not from the Empire. Not from the dark side. Not from me.
Feel the Force on Xbox One.
Scale of 1 to 10. How would you rate our kiss from last night?
Look who decided to join us. All right. You all know the drill. Run your routes. Lock your logbooks. You run into anything you can't handle.
Hurry!
Come back.
Gino, where are you? Get off me! Please stop! No!
Tommy, I have to finish it.
You have no idea what you're walking into.
What are you doing?
You don't know how large that group is, how armed.
I don't care. You can't stop this. What the hell are you doing here?
You think I'd let you do this on your own?
A lot of people in the alternative media are pointing out that free speech is constantly shrinking while hate speech is constantly growing. To the point where if you have archives of things that used to be said on gaming forums and internet websites 4 years ago, you will notice that things that were perfectly acceptable in the past are definitely not acceptable now. And you notice this with politicians, like my video with Trudeau is still coming, but basically when Trudeau put on the blackface, no one complained. Like there was no uproar, none of the people that went to the party had anything to say about it. All of a sudden, everyone is outraged. And back then, there wasn't a single media outlet talking about it. Why? Because people generally didn't care. But I disagree with it. I think free speech exists today. And I think, in fact, we have more free speech now than ever. The only thing is that you need to pay for it. If you have the money, if you have the connections and you can afford it, then you can hire a 16-year-old girl with autism, get her to skip school so that she can push your political ideology, and you can have a 16-year-old girl so you can hide behind her skirt whenever your ideology gets any side of criticism. And you can send that little girl to insult the leaders of the world and shame them because they do not follow your political ideology. You can literally do that if you have the money. And not only that, but if your fear-mongering pushes people to suicide, then there is not going to be any sort of controversy. You're not going to get any sort of backlash. And all the principles that we have about bullying people into suicide are going to be dropped. Why? Because you have money. So I'm going to tell you about an article which happened in 2010. And I'm picking this precisely because it's an old article. You have two parents which decided to commit suicide. But not only that, they also shot their 7-month-old daughter, which surprisingly survived after 3 days. So Francisco Lotero and Miriam Coletti shot their daughter and her toddler brother before killing themselves. Their son Francisco too died instantly after being hit in the back, but the daughter cheated death after the bullet from her father's handgun missed her vital organs. So she stood 3 days with a bullet in her chest, and then despite the fact that she received no nourishment, no water, no food, she managed to be taken to a hospital where she survived. Because they didn't give the name of the person, I couldn't find out to see if she's still alive or not. But I would definitely raise a GoFundMe to have this little girl talk to the people behind Greta, who, was saying, you need to panic now. Well, these parents panicked in the past. These parents in 2010 panicked, and that was 2019, and the world is still going on. There has been no calamity. The end of the world didn't approach. Their 2-year-old son could have been alive today. And there are plenty of cases of people that are doing this, that have committed suicide over fears of global warming. It's just that it's not very prominent in the news. And here's what I have beef with. I believe in free speech, and I've got nothing against the people behind Greta pushing her in order to fearmonger and, say whatever she wants to say. I think it's her right, and I think it's their right. Free speech is basically a human right, and you should have the liberty to say whatever you want. I do prefer, believe it or not, liberty over safety. It was quite funny to see a social justice warrior in Taiwan lecturing protesters that safety is more important than freedom. Like, if you really believe that, then go to a maximum penitentiary prison and go into the SHU. And you're going to have all the security and safety you can have there. You're just giving away your liberty. But other than that, it is absolutely the most safe and secure place in the entire world. So why am I talking about this? Well, what I understand is that according to Twitter's regulations, you're not allowed to misgender people. Like, you will get banned from Twitter if you misgender someone. It is absolutely ridiculous that, let's say, someone convicted of pedophilia for using the internet in order to try to attract kids. When he comes out of prison, he can still use Twitter, even if he would have tried to solicit kids on Twitter. You have terrorist organizations that have Twitter accounts. They're legal. But if you misgender a trans person, you immediately get your account suspended, which is a funny name for just closed down, shut down, because like suspended implies that it's going to be reinstated. But what I'm trying to say with this is that why is it that Twitter considers such a big problem misgendering? Because it should just be something regarding politeness, like you're just being rude. If someone tells you, like if someone changes their name, if I change my name and instead of Kodrin, my name is going to be Big Dick John. If someone refuses to call me Big Dick, it's just being rude to me. They're just being disrespectful. It's not that, they're dead cocking me or dead naming or whatever words they're coming up with. So Twitter uses the argument that the people from the transgender community seems to be quite vulnerable. And if you misgender them, you're basically pushing them to suicide. Like you're killing people with your keyboard. Okay, that's their argument. So if that is the case, right, if pushing people to suicide is bad, why isn't the people that are pushing for this climate awareness don't tone down their rhetoric, knowing that atrocities have happened in the past? Why aren't the media bringing up this case, which they have access to just as well as I do? Why aren't people offended over this? Because we live in the culture of offensiveness. And the answer is simple, because the people pushing the message have money. And if you have money, then you can say whatever you want. You have free speech. You can literally buy free speech in our day and age. And I think it's really important. I wish I could find the name of the girl that survived to see if she's still alive and, hopefully try to contact her, because genuinely I wish that she would have a talk with the people behind Greta. Maybe she can go to the United Nations, maybe she can go to Obama, maybe she can go, to all these people that have lifestyles that are heavily polluting. Like if you look a little bit into the history of Obama, he, what does Greta basically want you to do? She wants you not to drive an SUV, she wants you not to have an air conditioning, and she wants you to eat bugs and less meat, right? I'm kidding about the bugs thing, it's what the journalists suggest. But Obama, who has this big mansion next to the beach, allows Greta to visit him. Greta doesn't ask Obama, like, why do you live in this very luxurious mansion? Like, how much did it pollute in order to construct it, to mine the materials and all of that? Like, do you really need this big house? Apparently, that is not the question that she's interested in. And when Obama was at the Oval Office, people were saying that because he lived from Hawaii, he wanted the area to be incredibly hot. So the AC was always turned on maximum with the hot, to the point where people were saying you could grow an orchard there. So, this is what displeases me. You have people that travel with, that have personal jets. Like the fact that you have a personal jet and you're lecturing other people about pollution, fuck off. The fact that you have people that have their AC on nonstop and then they lecture other people about pollution, fuck off. The fact that, you have people that travel with Greta on her $4 million yacht and then they take plane tickets back home, fuck off. Like, I genuinely do not think that these people are concerned about the environment. Call me an Eastern European skeptic from an Eastern European type of low trust society, but I genuinely do not believe for a single second that these people are actually concerned even a little bit about the environment. Why are they doing this? I don't know. Maybe it's nice to be able to lecture to other people how to live. Maybe you get to feel like you have a little big dick when you consider yourself superior to other people to the point where you can tell them, oh, you're sinning. This is what you need to do. This is how you need to live your life. Maybe they're getting wine and dine. Maybe they're getting free publicity. There's plenty of reasons. Suffice to say, if you look at the people paying Greta, you will see that they all have corporations that are invested into making money of people, for example, getting carbon CO2 emission licenses. And you need to have a private company that comes in and gives you a receipt that you're okay. That's just like one of the things that I looked in 5 minutes of doing Google searches. Like, this is not conspiracy theories or anywhere. Like, the information is quite available. So yeah, like I sorry I can't make this news any more funny or anything like that. If you want and you're curious, you can Google other cases. There's plenty of people who committed suicide over global warming anxiety, I guess. And there is no outrage over it. That is my point. Thank you for watching this video, and hopefully I'll see you guys later.
Today's station.
Far away, as north as we can go, once stood an enchanted forest.
You see an enchanted forest?
Yes, it was a magical place. But something went wrong. Since then, no one can get in or out.
Wow, Papa, that was epic.
What would I do without you?
You'll always have me. Has Elsa seemed weird to you?
She seems like Elsa.
There's this voice. Voice? What does that mean? For the cliff!
The kingdom is not safe. Find who is calling to you. They may have answers.
I'm going with you. Anna? No. Excuse me, I climbed the North Mountain, survived a frozen heart, and saved you from my ex-boyfriend, so, I'm coming.
That's normal. Where are we? How did you get in the forest?
The mist parted for us.
Impossible. Where did you learn magic?
You can't just follow me into fire. Then don't run into fire.
Magic is very alluring. Without you, she may lose herself. Protect Arendelle at all costs.
I believe in you, Elsa, more than anyone or anything.
Quick question. Is the whole putting us in mortal danger going to be a regular thing?
Ever since I started my work in politics, I have heard stories and rumors of something sinister happening in South Africa. I was regularly sent images and videos claiming there was a white genocide going on right now. As a journalist, I have learned to never take anything at face value, to second guess and question it all. But I also believe that there is never smoke without fire. This is what makes South Africa so intriguing, because depending on your outlook, it is either a paragon of multiculturalism and social justice, or a powder keg with a genocide against the white population ready to erupt into an all-out race war. After doing some digging, I found an overwhelming mess of conflicting information about South Africa. Political turmoil, disappearing government funds, widespread corruption, and the sense that those responsible are never quite brought to justice. I found stories about the most gruesome murders imaginable, with almost no statistical proof of their existence. I tried to put the pieces together, but there were just too many missing. But the left wing and establishment media calling the farm murders a non-issue and praising the Rainbow Nation, and the far right predicting a civil war, I thought surely the truth must lie somewhere in the middle. To understand South Africa today, we have to understand South Africa then, 366 years ago to be precise, when the wheels of history were set in motion. It all begins in 1652, when the Dutch East India Company, or the VOC, became the first European group to establish a permanent settlement on South Africa's western coast. At this time, the rest of the country was inhabited only by the Khoisan people, an ancient nomadic group who foraged the land long before the black tribes migrated south into the modern-day KwaZulu-Natal. The VOC made its first purchase of land from the Khoisan people in 1671, establishing the Cape Colony in the areas surrounding what would become Cape Town. But it did not treat all under its rule well, and many children of the settlers were born into indentured servitude. Seeking a life beyond the VOC, a group known as the Trekboer set out beyond the borders of the Cape Colony in search of a free, semi-nomadic farming life in the country's interior. They were joined by the first of the Voortrekkers in 1836, a larger group that would eventually form the basis of South Africa's modern Afrikaner population. As their great trek reached its peak, war erupted among the Bantu tribes in the north as they migrated across the modern South African border. In 1816, a king named Shaka ascended to the Zulu throne. Within a year, he had conquered almost all of the neighboring tribes who were vying for control of the region. This period is known as the Mfukane, the Zulu word for crushing, scattering, or forced migration. In 1823, a rebellion under Mzilikazi split off from the Zulus and headed north into the Transvaal region, where it is estimated between 1 and 2 million Bantu people were massacred, leaving the area almost completely depopulated. It was during this time that several tribes, the Mfengu and the Ngwane among them, were forced to flee south, putting them on a direct course for the trekking Boer. This was unfortunate for the Boer, who had been making deals with smaller tribes in the area, trading favors, livestock, and weaponry for land. These deals between the Boer and the Bantu occurred frequently throughout South Africa's history. It wasn't long, though, until fair and mostly peaceful exchanges of land between whites and blacks gave way to violent, militaristic ones. In 1828, a new Zulu king, Dingane, took the throne. Piet Retief, a notable Voortrek leader, was determined to make civil deals with the tribes. He was granted land for his caravan of Voortrekkers in exchange for the return of 700 cows that had been stolen by a neighboring tribe. After returning these cows to the Zulu, Retief and his trekkers made settlements on the agreed-upon land. And in a show of good faith, the king invited Retief and a band of his men to witness a special performance put on by his soldiers. There was no show. Instead, the soldiers restrained Retief and marched him and 100 of his men to a bridge where they were beaten to death, leaving Retief for last, so he would be forced to watch the murder of his men and his son before he himself was killed. Dingane went on to massacre Retief's entire encampment, including hundreds of women, children, and many Khoisan people who had traveled alongside the Voortrekkers. The incident became known as the Wenen Massacre. While the Boer advance across the country was mostly peaceful, the Bantu tribes fought ceaselessly, killing white, black, and Khoisan people wherever they found them. In 1910, following the surrender of the Boer to the British, the Union of South Africa was formed. It comprised all of the now established colonies and united them as one legislative union. For a time, separation of blacks and whites was only a social convention, not the rigidly enforced legal structure it came to be. But after the election of the National Party in 1948, what we now know today as apartheid, a word that quite literally means separateness, was formally introduced across South Africa. A slew of new laws, including bans on mixed-race marriages and the Population Registration Act, which required people to register as black, white, colored, or Indian, were all introduced. And many of the descendants of the Bantu tribes were moved to the Bantustan areas, known today as the Black Tribal Homelands. In all aspects of life, blacks and whites became separated, often almost entirely. In the 1970s and 80s, apartheid became the focus of a global pushback. The UN brought sanctions, while internal resistance to apartheid began to find greater support. In the face of both peaceful and violent resistance, the National Party began a brutal crackdown. The crackdown only radicalized South Africa's anti-apartheid activists even further. In 1961, Nelson Mandela, then a member of the South African Communist Party, co-founded the Spear of the Nation, the armed wing of the African National Congress that rules the country today. The group, often abbreviated to MK, publicly announced its existence with 57 bombings on one day. Ultimately, with the help of the CIA, Mandela was arrested and spent the next 27 years in prison. During this time, the resistance to apartheid only became more radical. In 1986, Mandela's wife, Winnie, publicly endorsed the new trend of necklacing, a form of execution used against blacks thought to be collaborating with the government. They would be forced to wear a rubber tire filled with petrol around their chest or necks before being set ablaze. Eventually, following international pressure and the fear of a race-based civil war, the National Party released Mandela and entered into negotiations with the African National Congress, formally ending apartheid in 1991. 3 years later, Mandela led the party to victory in South Africa's first multiracial election, securing his presidency and bringing about a new constitution, emphasizing racial reconciliation. South Africa is a young democracy, and the country still faces great obstacles, like deciding who has the right to parts of land still owned by the Afrikaner minority, something that has come to be known as the land issue, and which is tied closely to attacks on farmers. It is this divided South Africa that I am stepping into today.
There were running battles in the city's street night last night. Police and protesters. All roads leading in and out of the city have been closed due to violent protests. Shops have been looted and roads have been closed.
Within hours of touching down in South Africa, I saw protests and rioting across the nation plastered on every TV screen. But there were hardly enough news channels to encompass even a fraction of the true chaos. As we drove from the airport, my guide told me that protesters had burned down the town hall. He said this happened every day, but every day was an understatement. While simply in transit to our next filming location, we drove past a nature reserve that was still ablaze. It was intense as I realized this was my first real glimpse of South Africa. But little did I know at the time, this burning building was only a mild symptom of a much deeper issue that plagued the nation.
It's an ongoing thing. People get discontented and they destroy. There's a sort of a schadenfreude in the thing, not because I say so, but because a casual examination of the thing reveals that it's true. There has been, for many years, going back to apartheid, but currently too, a habit of burning down schools if the children are discontented with the headmaster, for example.
In South Africa now, where we're following the burning of 13 schools in the country's Limpopo province. The protest broke out over a district boundaries dispute. Protesters say moves to include their neighborhoods into a new municipality would delay efforts to get them better housing and water. Government officials appealed for an end to the violence, saying it's affected the education of hundreds of children.
The number of municipal buildings that has been burnt down in South Africa over the past, let's say, 30 years runs to, I would say, comfortably 1,000. Very, very comfortably. My instinct is to say 3,000 or 4,000. If I total up all of the stories that I've read, in passing in newspapers over the past 30 years.
Well, I had come here to investigate the farm murders. I quickly learned the problems here were far more prolific. On average, the country sees 32 protests over schooling, education, land, and infrastructure every single day. And the cost of damage to South Africa's university buildings alone has already soared well above $45 million US. There was clearly more at play here than I first thought. So I pressed on, determined to find the truth. When investigating the farm murders, I was met with a remarkable scarcity of information. The government statistics did not report any rise or increase, and the BBC and other mainstream outlets echoed this position. I wanted to know why the murders of South Africa's rural white minority were so different from the rest of the crime in this country. And when I dug deeper, I discovered the Blood Sisters, an organization that works with government contracts to clean up crime scenes across South Africa. And I figured surely, if anyone, they would know what the reality of these numbers really looked like.
My name is Eileen Bejager. I'm one of the Blood Sisters, known in South Africa
We are a nationwide leader in crime scene cleanup.
Have you seen an increase in these kind of attacks in recent years?
Absolutely. 18 years ago when we started this business, there was attacks. According to our knowledge and what we experienced, they started weekly. We would get one call a week to come and assist at either farm attack or farm murder. Now it's daily. It's definitely daily. It's increased unbelievably.
Between 2012 and 2016, the attacks on smallholding farms or properties deemed as a farm or an area non-residential has increased by an average of 72.9%. The figures that I've just given you is according to our statistics. Government statistics will differ.
I don't suppose you can tell us much about why that is.
We don't.
I don't work closely with them because we don't do every scene, but their figures are funnily enough lower than ours. I don't have a particular reason for that. I don't wish to divulge on that.
Okay.
This was the first time on camera a qualified government associate had confirmed my worst fears. Not only are the farm murders real, the genuine numbers are much higher than we imagined. But I wanted to know more. In a country that already has extensive murder rates, why are these so much worse?
Farm murders are one of the most gruesome kind of crime scenes that we have to deal with, especially in South Africa. Farm murders are intentional. It's not robberies. It's intention. The intention of the attackers is, according to us and what we've seen, is to kill. It's been classified, especially on the crime stats as well, that it's attacks or robberies, burglaries. But because there is no statistic for farm murders currently in South Africa, the brutality of the farm murders in South Africa is undescribable. We found pieces of nails being pulled out. We found hands being removed from bodies. We found people raped, murdered, brutally murdered, babies, children. The farmers trying to protect their families, and there's just no stopping. The farm murders are brutal. Another one that stays with me is in Johannesburg, just outside Johannesburg. We had a farm murder where 5 people came in. It was arranged by the domestic worker. And they drowned the 12-year-old boy in boiling hot water. So we had to remove the skin from the bath as it was peeling off him in the hot water. That was a terrible scene. If you look at the worst movies ever made, it's not really a patch against what is really going on there. It's unbelievable.
Having heard from the far right corners of the internet that these murders were racially based, I was intent on finding out what motives the Blood Sisters attributed to these kinds of attacks.
90% of the increase we found is due to unemployment, racial discrimination, and there's no hope. If you don't start your own business in South Africa, where are you going to work? There's no work.
Racial discrimination against who, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, I have to be careful. Yeah,
because
I have to be a little bit careful.
We work very closely with government.
Yeah.
I spoke to Simon about it outside. Racial discrimination against people. People I know what you have to say, and
No, it's okay.
we have to be so careful.
Yeah, I have to think.
We love everybody to hear what we have to say. We want to say so much more, but we have to exercise so much restraint.
Anonymously,
stay behind and work.
I will tell you a lot of stuff.
I knew I had to investigate further. I had to meet the families caught up in these attacks. So I traveled to the heartland of South Africa, where these murders take place every single day.
The history goes back. We are now third generation on this farm. Third generation. My grandfather arrived here in the 1800s. He died of a heart attack. And then my dad inherited this portion and his brother inherited the top farm, which my dad eventually over the years bought back. So it's been in the family for more than 100 years. Myself and my 3 siblings grew up here, went to school in Graafnet, which I'm sure you came through, and then went to study in Cape Town. And yeah, it was always our dream to come back. And it was always the intention to come back, not under these circumstances though. My dad was living alone. My mum was in an Alzheimer's home. So this is quite hard. And there was this guy, Sally, and he lay in wait for my dad. And at 9 o'clock that night, he knocked on the back door. My dad opened the door and he shot my dad in the stomach. My dad managed to get to the phone to phone my aunt. And then he found the neighbour and said, "Listen, I've been shot." And the neighbour could hear the rest of the gunshots. And then the phone went dead. There were 8 shots. There was one shot that ricocheted against that wall. All the time my dad's being shot. Back, arms, legs. And my dad slumped over this chair. Slumped forward over this chair. And he was shot in the back of the head here. Just execution style in the back of the head. So it was 8. They found 8 cartridges, but 6, he was shot 6 times.
Who came and found him here?
My aunt and friends of theirs. I mean, there were 4 farmers. One of the people that were here on the scene was studying to be a doctor. They tried CPR. He was dead by the time they got here. He'd already succumbed to his injuries. Yeah, so this is where my dad died. He was killed. I know, for what, you know, for what? He was a good man. He was an awesome man. And to shoot somebody 6 times, execution style. You think it gets easier? It never does, unfortunately. My dad was, and you will back me up, and everybody will back me up. My dad was the most loving person. He cold-bloodedly just get it for, and so all they took about 20,000 rand in the safe. They took that, helped themselves to food in the fridge, and then hit the road, and then bumped into, or saw all the farmers arriving, and ran. And they spent the night, the 2 of them, at one of the farms, and got back to Aberdeen. And by Saturday morning, the farmers had caught both of them.
The farmers, not the police.
The farmers. It was a tip-off. And the farmers caught them, and eventually the police apprehended him.
So were these people brought to justice?
He got 15 years. 15 years. So, you know, with these 15 years, you can sit for six years and he'll come back. And he'll probably come and kill us or kill another farmer because he knows how easy it is, that he's got away with it. But no remorse whatsoever. Nothing. He spun so many stories in court that the judge eventually just said, rather keep quiet because I don't believe you. So justice hasn't been served yet.
Listening to Janine's story, standing in the exact spot it had happened, was intensely uncomfortable. But it would not be the only sobering story I heard that day. Just hours after sitting with Janine, and only 50 miles away, we entered the farm of another family who had been tormented by the nation's growing crime wave. The Haas family have had to go to extraordinary measures to protect their family after their father was shot in the face during an attack at their home.
I woke up one morning and heard a terrible noise. My son and my little daughter were in the house, and I don't know why, but I just screamed. It happened so fast. I ran to my bedroom window, and I just saw people jumping over the wall, and it was already over. I went outside, and I saw the blood. Only then did I realise my husband had been shot. The marks are still on the wall. You hear about this every day. There's not a week that goes by without a farm attack. My husband survived the attack, but others are not as lucky as us.
Seeing the scars and the impact watching this attack unfold at their home has had on this family brought the situation in South Africa into sharp focus for me. And the security measures, the electric fences, the thermal cameras, as well as a closet stocked with guns and weaponry, now serve as a daily reminder of what happened here for a family that is already struggling to heal.
During the week, I'm alone here. My kids go to boarding school, and I almost never go out. I always lock everything. It's had a huge effect on my life. My fears are for another attack. My peace has been stolen. I just never feel safe in my own home.
Outside the charmed world of rich and famous influencers who paint a story of security and prosperity from within their gated communities in Johannesburg and Cape Town, it seemed everywhere in South Africa there was a story of tragedy and bloodshed to be told.
Yes, my mother-in-law was murdered here in 2008, January 2008. That strangler and with a belt of a belt around her neck, and they take out her eyes with a fork, and they prick her with a fork. Her whole body was pricked with a fork, and it was very cruel, very, very cruel.
You see, the problem is I will never go back and buy a farm there. I will not. It is too risky, too capital intensive. And, to make yourself safety, because you're not safety even you're on a tractor. It doesn't matter where, because they ambush you. I'm not scared. I'm not scared for that. But, if I know to do something better, I'll rather do something better. That's why I'm here. I'm retired now, and I'm not farming anymore.
Do you think the government
turns a blind eye to the murders of white farmers?
Yeah, I personally think so. We had a system in place way back, we call the commander system, and they were very, very much helpful to the farmers. But then they disbanded them all, and they've left everything over just for the police. But I think the farmers now are coordinating with each other, and they are doing the most of the job in order to catch some of these culprits.
So the farmers are now kind of acting as their own police force.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
In fact, some of these farmers had added me into WhatsApp groups where over months I've seen the reports of attacks, the theft and killing of livestock, gunfights in the streets, and of course, farm murders. In these groups, I saw firsthand the lengths of coordination these farmers must go to in order to deal with their situation alone.
The Specialised Crime Unit in Port Elizabeth took over the case. And I really believe if they weren't involved, we wouldn't have got as far as we have got. But now they've been told, this is specialised crime, they've been told not to do farm murders anymore. They're not allowed to do farm murders. Yes. My dad's case was the last case they were allowed to do.
Why?
The government.
The government
has said the serious crime can't look at farm murders anymore.
These stories of government failure are heartbreaking, not least of all because these farmers are left feeling helpless and alone. I was due to move on to the last leg of my journey when I was introduced to a man named Louis, who lost everything in a drought that hit his region.
Basically, we are in a drought, and the state has declared it a disaster. They allocated 375,000 to our district, but it did not reach us. Nobody knows where the money is, but it has obviously been stolen, and it's made everything much worse.
Louis showed me around his farm, where the effects of the drought were a striking sight.
I can't afford to pump the water out of the ground anymore. It has gotten me into massive debt. It's no longer even affordable to run my machinery, pump the water, or go to the wholesaler and buy the basic ingredients to feed my cattle and maintain the farms. It is all totally pointless. My farm used to be a green oasis. It used to be a healthy, perfect farm. Now it has all turned to dust, to barren wasteland, with piles of bones from the sheep I once had, who died of thirst.
Over the past few years, the South African government has used its Black economic empowerment policy to coerce utility companies into depleting the number of white workers to reflect the racial makeup of the country. In reality, this means that companies with government contracts must shoot for a goal of a workforce with no more than 8% white workers. Since these mass layoffs, filling engineering and other high-skilled positions has been difficult, only worsening the water crisis and causing serious ramifications for the country's white farming minority.
I could no longer afford to maintain my old home, so it fell into disrepair, and we now live in a much smaller shack down the road. There is nothing left of that house. The floors have rotted, the walls are breaking. The place my children were born, the place my wife and I built from scratch, and used to love, it is now just rubble. This is happening to everyone, everywhere here. You drive up and down these lands, and all you can see is dilapidated farms. There are extremely difficult times laying ahead for us. Everything points towards them trying to break us.
In a nation so dependent on these farms for its food and for some of its major exports like Angora mohair, it's hard to believe the government is doing so little to help, or worse, as some are speculating, purposely withholding aid as they battle with farmers for the land.
The whole objective of the government is to make it very difficult economically. Through fuel and property taxes, they are overtaxing us on everything. Like everyone in South Africa, our lives are turning to ruin, and they are doing it to us on purpose. The government here feel nothing for us. They want us starving or dead. It is a strategy they have been working on for years. It's hard, working here every day, knowing they are going to chase you out in 6 months. The government even said openly they are going to take our land.
What's called, sir?
I will never recover from this. I just hope my children can have a better life one day.
Spending time with Louis on his dying farm has been a truly heart-wrenching experience. Not only are these farmers forced to live with the constant fear of break-ins and some of the most gruesome crimes imaginable, but every day has been a struggle, even just for the survival of the very land to which they are so deeply rooted. To make matters worse, through with their promises, Louis will shortly be losing all his land as well. Listening to Louis describe his situation was surreal. It was far too removed from the reasonable middle ground I expected to find between the left and the right's posturing of the issues facing South Africa. Only days after leaving South Africa, I saw Louis' fears vindicated in Parliament. The ANC announced they would absolutely be taking white land by force, expropriation without compensation. Even the ANC's most famous leader, Nelson Mandela, a known radical communist, at least believed in the concept of compensation. He didn't even propose a motion this extreme. This will be the first time in modern South Africa we see something like this play out. In fact, all of South Africa's political parties have steadily become more radical in their approach. The EFF, which holds 10% of the vote, are notorious for singing an anti-apartheid song at their rallies, calling for the deaths of white farmers. The situation has now become so dire that nations like Australia have begun considering giving refugee status to white farmers, while others within South Africa hold mass protests before the plasmoord, the Afrikaans word for farm murders, reaches a point of no return. I began to wonder if the remoteness of their farms simply made these farmers an easy target, or if other white South Africans faced the same problem. So I met with Liz, a businesswoman with a successful paintball field and shop near Port Elizabeth. I've probably had over 100 break-ins at my business in the last 10 years. I've been in 2 armed robberies at my work. So as we were closing, guys just roll in and basically pull out a gun and take all your stuff. In one of the armed robberies, one of the guys was beating me with a metal pipe over my head so that you just shut up and be quiet and just subdue any... they basically just don't tell you to be quiet. They just make you be quiet. You mentioned to us earlier that many of your sales are more for self-defense paintball guns. Can you explain that? Basically, a lot of people are getting robbed these days at their homes and at their work, and they buy paintball guns with solid balls and pepper balls because it's a non-lethal defense form. You don't need a license. Getting a gun license in South Africa is very time-consuming, very costly, and you're not guaranteed that you're actually going to get a license. So a lot of people are buying paintball guns from us to basically shoot anyone who's on their property or trying to get on their property with a solid ball that's basically made of nylon or fiberglass, and it's like a deterrent. Things have gotten so bad that Liz has been forced to bring armed security for her daily cash out. Sometimes, when we're busy, then like my dad will come to the range and basically bring his gun, and then we just have that as an extra precautionary measure because you never know what's going to happen. It's like the Wild West at times. Some people watch Wild West movies. There's days where you feel like you're in your own Wild West movie in Africa. Just days after visiting Liz, she was the victim of another armed break-in. Like many other white South Africans, she has now decided to close down her business and attempt to leave the country. South Africa's white population has fallen by 23,000 in the last year, and with the recent surge in murders and the announcement of land expropriation, that number is expected to skyrocket before the end of 2018. To get to the bottom of why this was happening, I wanted to meet some of the nation's policymakers to hear their side of the story. So I managed to secure an interview with Thabo Mokoena, a powerful businessman and a member of the ruling party's provincial executive committee, and someone I have been advised is a major force within the African National Congress.
So there's been very slow progress in terms of addressing the land or redistributing the land. So we must speed up. And it's not the question that government does not have money for compensation or there is no money for compensation in the system. I think it's just part of the problem is that the bureaucracy is way too slow and then it undermines, the good objective. So you need to have cutthroat departments that understand the agency and the plight of the people. When they are required to do their work, they must do it.
Are things leaning more towards with or without compensation? I don't know. I'm just curious. Yeah.
Look, the decision that has been taken, it's without compensation. There's nothing that government can do that is illegal to the farmers. Neither there is nothing that the farmers can refuse, which is law. So they don't have much options. It is not the intention of the ANC to go and grab the land illegally and then that type of thing. No. We will do it within the prescriptions of the laws of this particular country. And then if it means that the laws of this country are not adequate to address that, the first thing to do is to introduce the new laws that allows us to be able to. But once it's law, no farmer, no person that can come and say that I am going to disobey this law. No, do it at your own peril.
This seems to be the official party line. Don't worry, everything is fine. Ignore, cover up, and don't mention it. But former financial advisor to the ANC turned political activist Simon Roach has spoken out against this approach in recent years.
Our economy is imploding. The value of our currency has deteriorated dramatically, almost unbelievably. We've been downgraded to junk status. We have an official unemployment rate of about 38%, just over 38%, but an unofficial, in other words, the non-government sources say that it is certainly 50%. We have about 16.3 million, in fact, 16.3 million people on social grants,
and an income tax base of 3.1 million people. Taken together, these are the reasons we believe there will be a civil war. And I'd like to add a final anecdote. We recently had a protest in South Africa against farm murders. The protest was called Black Monday. And afterwards, our Minister of Defense said that if whites stage another such protest, they will bring a civil war upon themselves. They will provoke a genocide.
Like the wider situation in South Africa, my conversation with Thabo quickly became messy and confusing, something I began to believe was a tactic to avoid confronting the reality of the situation. The implications of this tactic became increasingly concerning throughout my trip. To simply ignore racial tensions, economic and energy crises, and of course the farm murders seemed shockingly irresponsible as the evidence on the ground continued to mount. It was at this point that I discovered another phenomenon sweeping the country: white squatter camps. So I went to one such site to investigate it for myself. This squatter camp, just outside the nation's capital, is one of many across South Africa and is home to some of the country's most disadvantaged people, many of whom have struggled to find work, basic medical care, or even shelter because of the country's Black economic empowerment laws. It is built on the site of an old dumping ground and is home to around 60 people, most of whom are children.
We're okay to film?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, this is Donnie. He's going to be a tour guide.
Hi, Donnie. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, well, the place is about people that haven't got place to stay, that stays on the street. So we help them, and there's some of the people that is coming in that's got drug problems and all that. We help them with it, and especially women that is abused with children, and we help them with that. That is what we are doing here. So, and from the public side outside, we don't get any support. So the men here, we are working. We love to do it because especially women and children, they don't get any support from the government. They don't get support. And we haven't got power or lights, electricity we haven't got yet. That's why we got water, but Kobus is supporting us with the water, so he's paying that damages out of his pocket.
Could you tell us just in simple terms why this is here?
Because there's no help for whites in South Africa. Not so help, nothing. So when whites land on the streets, they ran to squatter camps because they know there's food and clothes. That's why I started it.
Who builds these houses? You guys do?
Ourselves.
Yeah.
We do it ourselves. We do it ourselves. There's this one guy stuck there. Look at this room. One guy.
So without this place open, where would these kids be?
They will be on the streets. Or they will be in foster, or they will be in somebody else's care.
The government doesn't have a whole lot of programs?
No, nothing.
Well, there are poor people of all races in South Africa. People here are often refused help based solely on their race. Miss Grace, the de facto mother of the camp, told me how one resident was refused treatment at a hospital because of the color of his skin, while children in the camp were refused places at a local school for the same reason.
There's nothing. There's in 2001, it was stipulated from the government, no support to any whites whatsoever. No aid, nothing.
Why couldn't you go to one of the hostels that the government has set up?
Because of the skin color. Yeah, and yeah, it's not at all. We just help white people there. Because there's not the place that does it. If you go to there's many places I know, Jesus Disciples, Manger, those places, they take blacks and they put the whites out. You see, so yeah, that's about it.
So wait, there are places here that will only help blacks but won't help whites?
That's true.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Like, people find that a very bizarre idea.
Yeah, I don't know how to say it. It's just the racism going around.
So I'm just here to get my life in order and try to give my daughter a better life.
Were there any other places you could have gone other than?
No.
Why not?
Nobody else didn't want to help. I've tried a lot, and at the end of the day, Uncle Kobus was the only one that took me in.
This is the only place who could help us with a place to stay and things. They are the only ones who helped us with it. No one else wanted.
If it wasn't for them, I would have been in the streets. I want to sleep with my wife and my kids on the street. That's it.
Today I'm suffering because of people who is like racist with us. And they don't care about our young people because you can't get jobs anymore. Because this side of the earth it's bad for us. And I'm not lying, it's bad. No one can get jobs around here, we're suffering badly. Even the youngest kids. I've got a 5-year-old, 2-year-old. I don't know how I'm going to give them a life around here.
Well, where we lived, things were very dangerous. The one day, there was black people walking in the street, and they shot through our windows. And I went, and the police did nothing.
You can't even walk in the streets around at night. During the day, they always rape you or they beat you up. They're swearing at you in the language. They know you don't know the language, but they will come and swear at you, breaking you down around you. You don't feel like a person around you anymore. So they're making sure our people, we don't have a life anymore. They will make sure about it.
This is just one of dozens of camps like it in South Africa, a growing testament to the resentment the country's white population now faces. In order to learn more about why anti-white racism is thriving in the country, I spoke to the deputy president of Black First, Land First, one of South Africa's more radical political parties.
Last year, Andile Mqitama founded the Black First, Land First, which he says aims to put land and the economy back in the hands of black South Africans. BLF is taking...
We have to fight in order to attain freedom as the black majority in this country. And the fight has to be located in taking back the land and expropriating back to the people, in seizing the means of production and expropriating everything, or rather redistributing everything equally. And a society that would embody a value system that puts black people first will have to be attained through confrontation, unfortunately, because our people have waited for so long, right? We've waited for so long, peaceful, and nothing is happening in terms of changing our lived experience, right? In fact, the settlers know that very well. So we are already at war. Well, our people are at war in farms now.
White people and persons like Breitenbach are land thieves, and they have no stake to the society, and the black majority understands that, and we will respond accordingly.
I think black people have been patient enough for more than 400 years of colonialism, and we don't want you to feel pity for us. We are coming for you, and we are going to get everything that you owe. It's ours.
During my trip, I was worried to see views like these so readily accepted and even celebrated on television and in the print media, particularly given the truth of the history of the Boer people. But is there a solution? I've been told about a remote town with virtually no crime, where the people are content to be separate from the rest of the country. They even have their own currency. Now, what's interesting about this town, and probably one of the biggest reasons it is criticized, is that it is the one place in the world where, by law, only white people are allowed to live. Naturally, I was intrigued and wanted to find out more. So I took a trip to Orania, a town in Northern Cape Province, to find out more. While in Orania, I managed to secure an interview with the mayor. My guide explained to me that Mr. Boshoff had turned down interview requests from mainstream news outlets like CNN and BBC. So I took the rare opportunity to sit down and discuss his vision for the town on camera.
The Verge movement is 30 years old this year. It was created in 1988 when it was quite clear that minority government in South Africa was unsustainable and that some agreement needed to be reached with the majority of the population. One line of thinking was that human rights and constitutional guarantees would suffice to look after Afrikaners' interest in South Africa. It was clear to us and our leaders at that time that it would not be sufficient, that in Africa especially a constitution is not always worth the paper that it's written on, and that we really needed something more structural, more concrete.
One thing that really stands out here is the near total lack of crime. Everywhere I went, people left their cars unlocked with the windows down. I was struck by the sight of a moped with the keys left in the ignition all afternoon in a country with some of the highest crime rates in the world.
Let me say with a certain amount of pride that if it's not zero, it's quite close to zero. There are petty crimes of different kinds in any community. But in terms of the crime wave that is all over South Africa, we don't have anything of that kind. And there's different ways in which you could reach the point of a close to zero crime rate. And we have succeeded in doing that.
This single white enclave has been the subject of international derision for its apparently racist mission to keep Afrikaner culture alive. But what I soon realized is that the concept behind this town was no different to that of the Black tribal homelands, an area of land 10,000 times the size of Orania that South Africa's white minority are still forbidden to live on today.
It's no more racist than any black community, of which there are literally thousands in South Africa. And I say that because we don't define ourselves in the first instance in terms of race, but in terms of culture and language and the whole tradition.
To people in the West, this town may seem bizarre, but it's clear that like many other places in South Africa, and indeed the world, the people of Orania consider the threat to their culture great enough to take extraordinary steps to ensure its survival.
The Orania movement members are more than 5,000 at the moment. So it's small, it's relatively small, but nonetheless, we've created a kind of alternative that is ready to grow.
I was certainly struck by the sense of peace in Orania, something which stood in stark contrast to many of the other towns I visited while in South Africa. Orania is just one potential solution to this crisis, and for the people living there, it seems to be working. On and off camera, many people, both black and white, did suggest segregation as a potential solution to this crisis. And even more worrying is the growing number of people preparing for a race-based civil war if another solution cannot be found.
Simon is now one of the senior members of the South, the world's largest non-state civil defense force, a network of around 200,000 members who believe a civil war is coming, and their only option is to be prepared. Simon invited me to the home of one of its members to take a look at the kind of preparations these people are making.
Okay, so these are the preparations of the Erasmus family, which includes a hydroponic system to be taken with them in their vehicles in the event of a civil war, a nationwide anarchy crisis. And these will be laid in their vehicles and taken down so that they can start crops from scratch in any remote area as long as there's water. So they have five cars in their plan, you could say, and then they have that truck that will carry a whole lot of stuff. When they move out, they're building a sort of canopy for the truck for refugees that they will pick up. It's obviously just in the early stages.
And that's a dryer for all the veggies. You can even dry meat inside it, and prepare that food. That can keep us 2-3 years, definitely.
The family doesn't use it for its day-to-day use. It's specifically a preparation for a nationwide anarchy situation.
The scale and thoroughness of these preparations would make you think the apocalypse is just around the corner. But Simon assured me that these were only the preparations of one of thousands of others across the country prepping in the same way. In fact, every year the Sightlanders hold a huge evacuation drill where different groups from across South Africa carry out a complex run-through of their plan for when civil war breaks out, something they believe is inevitable. All this talk of civil war seemed extreme, so I asked Simon how he thought South Africa could go down such a dark path.
I think, Lauren, that it would be a very spontaneous, sudden thing, for the simple reason that South Africa is a bubbling cauldron at the moment. You have seen across South Africa these spontaneous events where people run into a bunch of H&M stores and smash them down. You've seen for yourself this very morning, we arrived on the scene a very short while after a nature conservation facility had been burnt to the ground by disgruntled neighbors. Perhaps it was people who felt that they were owed more jobs or something. We don't know. These things happen so quickly. And so many people are embittered at the moment. Our government is woefully unable to provide modest governance.
The Sightlanders have been criticized by mainstream politicians and media alike for their dramatic approach in dealing with the country's problems. But as the crime wave deepens, and the government's anti-white rhetoric is now being realized in legislation to take white land, I have to wonder, if we were in their shoes, would we be compelled to act in the same way?
Hello, this is Tony.
And could the Sightlanders be preparing
Recently,
for what is
a House
becoming
bill
an ever more realistic, bloody future in South Africa? What I found most striking about their preparations was that we did not uncover a mass amount of weapons or offensive materials. Instead, we came upon first aid kits, a hydroponic system, and plenty of survival equipment. In fact, every year the Sightlanders hold a huge evacuation drill where different groups across South Africa carry out a complex run-through of their plan for when civil war breaks out, something they believe is inevitable.
Lauren, Sightlanders organization is the first line and the last line of defense in the event that our worst fears are realized and a race-based civil war engulfs South Africa.
If the choice is between segregation and civil war, the future for all South Africans looks bleak. But there is perhaps a third option. Why don't white South Africans just leave? Well, this third option is far more complex than it may appear.
There's no way for the average South African to leave South Africa.
You must have, in most of these cases, $300,000. That's 6 million rand. A normal South African doesn't make 6 million rand. So there's just no way for the normal South African to leave.
The Afrikaner people are not recent migrants. Their South African roots date back hundreds of years. They have evolved their own language, their own culture, and are living on land that their families have farmed for generations. Land that was not stolen. I don't blame those that want to stay. There is something biblical about South Africa. You can feel it in the air. Their history lives in the very soil they work every single day, and many will not be convinced to leave it so easily. Beyond this, for those who do wish to leave South Africa, the process and costs have made it nearly impossible for the most vulnerable to travel beyond its borders.
If I can get a chance, I will go. If I can get a better life outside of this, I will go. Me and my 2 kids, I need a life to make for them. Because my life is ruined because I don't have a job. There's nothing out there. I want something to happen for them. Because they're still young. I need to get it for them to have a life. Because if they don't have a life, what is going to happen? The blacks is going to kill my kids. There was rumors around here. They said it's going to come in, I don't know when. I don't know which, like Zuma, I don't know if it's Zuma or Malema or whatever kind, said if he takes over, he's going to kill our whites.
Despite having never seen anything quite so beautiful as the stars in the South African night sky, or the vast landscapes of the farmlands, I was relieved to come back home.
It's no life to live, putting your children to bed behind gated doors and cell block windows. Having to sleep with pepper spray under your pillow or a gun on your nightstand. Leaving this place is a luxury these people do not have. My South African journey came to an end, while the people I met are stuck in a home that no longer welcomes them, where they must fight to justify their very existence to a hostile majority. Does this amount to genocide? Not yet, but according to organizations like Genocide Watch, and taking into account everything I have seen and heard on the ground,
South Africa is stepping closer to that reality every single day. But could there be a light at the end of the tunnel? Coverage of the issue has thrown these farmers and the wider Boer population into the global spotlight, as mainstream media like Fox News, BBC, and even CNN have begun to report on this crisis. And with this story set to play out on the world stage, it will be for South Africans to face their future. But now, at least one thing is certain. With the world awakening to the plight of these people, they won't be facing it alone.
You never know what's going to happen. It's like the Wild West at times. watch Wild West movies. There's days where you feel like you're in your own Wild West movie in Africa.
Hey, Mike, sorry to drag you down here in this dungeon. Talk some movies. Remember this movie Incubus?
I do. We watched it back in college.
Yeah, you showed this to me, and I remember it had this trailer on there because William Shatner's in this movie. So we did a video on this a while back. It was top 10 shitty Shatner movies. And actually, I don't think this is a shitty movie. I think it's actually pretty good.
Well, William Shatner thought it was shitty.
Yeah, there was it's funny, there was a Q&A at a panel he did with Nimoy, and they were talking about Incubus, and Shatner had a lot to say about it. Like, he was saying, it was filmed entirely in Esperanto, and he went into the whole history of it. And then Nimoy asks, so was it a good movie? Was it interesting? He goes, no.
Yeah. So what's funny to me is that Shatner was doing not so good movies prior to Star Trek, and then not so good movies after Star Trek. So he had a whole history of
it was early '66, I think. Yeah,
I do like to mention though, he has done some good movies. They're not all shit.
Now available from Windstar Home Video.
So it was made by director Leslie Stevens, who did The Outer Limits, and Shatner was on The Outer Limits a couple episodes.
Why he probably got into this.
Yeah, and he was in a couple Twilight Zones, of course.
Everybody knows that Twilight Zone episode, the Nightmare at 20,000 Feet. But those Outer Limits ones are really funny. Remember the one where he's in the spacesuit?
Yeah.
That one. He makes some crazy.
He's just making faces,
expressions,
and there's a monster coming in through the portal of the ship. Basically, if you just take Shatner making a crazy facial expression and combine that with some goofy-looking monster, you have cinematic magic.
Yeah.
Lost in a film vault in France for nearly 35 years.
So this movie was lost for 35 years until they found a copy in France. But the original idea was to film the whole movie in the language of Esperanto.
I wonder if it was lost on purpose because it was so bad.
I don't know. Well, we'll get into that because it has merits. It definitely does. But the idea was that Esperanto is a universal language, and people they would appeal to a wide market. Consider was you're not going to be able to fill a movie theater with all Esperanto people.
What are you talking about? Back up, man. In a film vault in France for nearly 35 years.
So this movie was lost for 35 years until they found a copy in France. But the original idea was to film the whole movie in the language of Esperanto.
I wonder if it was lost on purpose because it was so bad.
I don't know. Well, we'll get into that because it has merits. It definitely does. But the idea was that Esperanto is a universal language and people speak it all over the world. The idea was that
of course
they would appeal to a wide market, although what they didn't consider was you're not going to be able to fill a movie theater with all Esperanto speaking people.
I never thought about that.
Yeah, because you're not going to find enough people in big numbers in one spot.
Didn't it have something to do with like Gene Roddenberry? Also, I think he wanted to film Star Trek in that.
Yeah, could you imagine if Star Trek was in Esperanto?
That would have been bad. From what I saw and heard from like those people that have learned the language, apparently the actors in the movie didn't really do the best job. Like they mispronounce a lot of the Esperanto.
Yeah, like it's not good Esperanto. Yeah. They weren't native speakers.
They mispronounced this made-up language, so it's a big deal.
Hey, do you know any Esperanto? What do you got? No, I don't.
Packed with gorgeous blondes, satanic sacrifices.
So this movie, it came out right before all the hype about like satanic cults and evil material like Rosemary's Baby, The Exorcist, The Omen. This was kind of right before that phase happened. So what it's about, roughly, just in a nutshell, this movie, Shatner plays this soldier named Mark who returns from the war, and he's seduced by a succubus, who are like a female demon that seduces men, but then they actually end up falling in love, but she